All right, so we are at Edson Rest Stop, which is the last outpost before we get to the city of Edmonton, which means this trip is complete. And I had not planned to do a exit video on how the rest of the trip went, but I think we'll do it. So 2,600 kilometers, give or take. I'd have to check the exact figure. It made it there, we made it back, and I think overall there are a few things to discuss, and this is the longest trip I've taken with this car, so I think it's worth looking into. So first thing I want to do is I want to discuss things in two ways: chassis and powertrain. The engine did great. I was having some spark blowout that occurred when I was getting into higher boost or sudden boost. I ended up gapping the plugs down to 0.020 or whatever the thou definition is, 2.0 or 2.3, somewhere in there, and that solved that problem. But it caused a little bit of a cold idle and cold acceleration issue until the plugs and combustion chambers had warmed up. So I got to warm it up a little bit. I think the long-term shot there is probably to replace the plug wires and the coil. The coil might be getting tired, and that's why it can't sustain a 0.3 gap. Other than that, pretty darn good. It didn't overheat, not at all, as a matter of fact. The transmission remains the transmission, but there is some driveline vibration on mild acceleration, mild deceleration above about $120. So I think chances are either a bearing is going bad or there is a drive shaft balance issue. And if it's a drive shaft balance issue, I just won't be taking care of that. I just won't do $120 on the highway, and I'll be good. In terms of body, chassis, etc., that part was pretty good. Windshield wipers worked, no malfunctions. But check this out. You can tell which brakes are working. This brake is working. This brake is working. This brake is working. This brake is working. But the lion's share seems to be coming from this brake. And the reason it's so dusty and brake dusty is because this caliper has a tendency to seize up from time to time. So I'm going to have to get the brakes serviced in order to alleviate that. And I think it'll be a full flush rebuild for all the calipers and an adjustment and maybe some rotors if I can find them. What else? There was something else too. Yes, how to drive it. So the trailing arm bushings are shot. I believe whatever constitutes tie rods are shot, ball joints are shot. This thing gets blown around like crazy, and it's kind of unsettling because you'll be just driving along and a gust of wind will almost throw you off the road. And there's a lot of compensation that has to happen when you do that. So that'll be on the list. Headlights. I couldn't drive at night. These are really kind of car show city headlights. They're LED. They don't really have a good beam dispersion pattern. So that'll have to be dealt with. If I choose to take this out on the road again, I'll have to get a different set of headlights for it. I think that's really it, Oh yeah, my temperature sender is acting up a little bit. And I don't know, I'd have to go into my own schematics and tell you if the temperature reading from this splits off to the ECU. If it does, that might also explain some of the readings or some of the issues I've had. Because if the ECU thinks it's not getting the right temperature, it may change fuel trims or ignition timing or sort of those factors, and that might be important. The heater was good, thank God. All the glass was good, door seals good. Overall, I guess this is just sort of proof that just because a car is old doesn't mean you can't take it out, but it does mean that you're going to have some considerations that a modern car might not have. And that's the dangerous part, I think. Driving this in a fleet of modern cars sort of causes some problems because at the end of the day, they can stop faster than you, they can handle better than you, they can likely accelerate better than you. And what that means is they're all interacting with each other on a playing field that's level for them. And that could be dangerous to you because they might expect you to move like those new cars, and you can't do that. So what that means is you really have to have following distances, because if they stop suddenly and you can't stop as fast, you might hit them. Sometimes you have to swallow your ego and let people pass you because you might not be able to keep up with them. off a set of lights, which is the case with this. It really doesn't build power until 3,000. So there's a bunch of considerations that factor into driving this car that long distance in a world of modern cars. And some of it's safety, some of it's equipment, some of it's comfort. No cruise control, obviously. That's another thing. This car, despite the fact that I have noise insulated everything I can touch with really nice foam, it's still loud. So I am listening to podcasts through a set of either Beats Fit Pros or AirPods Pro, and a set of 101 dB ear protection that I usually use for shooting. And I still can't hear myself think. And that's the biggest overarching review of how this trip has gone. Overall, the trip itself, aside from all this and actually driving the car, was fantastic. I got to see some family. I got to reconnect with people I hadn't seen in a couple decades, and that in itself is worth it, I think. Yeah. One other thing. Driving a car this old, for all the reasons that I've said, that long, can be dangerous, is a function of being tired. Because all of those things I mentioned are not a big deal on their own, or even together when you have a good state of mind. But if you've been driving for 8 or 10 or 12 hours, what you're going to find is that you may not be able to properly compensate and multitask when it comes to dealing with the sloppy steering and the bad brakes, and maybe that little idle issue that we had, or potentially all that wind noise, or a clutch that's kind of weird, or headlights that don't quite work as well. There's a bunch of things that you need to think about before you embark on a road trip, a voluntary road trip with something this old. And that's it, I think. Thank you so much. And actually, I had a really good interaction with the viewers on the first 3 parts of this, and I think that's really cool, and I'm very appreciative. Beyond this journey, I don't want you to stick around. I don't want you to subscribe. You don't have to do any of that. But I'd just like to thank you for watching the content that I did put out on this. It was as much for me as it was for you, and I'm really glad you got to enjoy it. That's it. Under 10 minutes, I'm going home. I'm going to have a shower. I'm going to cuddle with my kitty, and that'll be the end of this journey.